Welcome to another episode of the Eric and Mark Show. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. One of the questions that I want to bring forth vis-a-vis an analogy is, how do you combat oppression when combat is not an option and detachment isn't either? We're going to seek to answer this question, Mark, through three scenarios. Scenario 1 will take place on the job front. Scenario 2 will take place on the home front. And the third scenario will take place on the goal front. Now, Mark, before we get into these three scenarios, it is worthy to note the common denominator that exists in all three of these scenarios. The first of the common denominators is that there is a playground executive that is operating from a position of advantage or perceived advantage. The second common denominator is that there is a person that is operating or functioning from the position of disadvantage or perceived disadvantage. And the third common denominator, from the perspective of the disadvantaged person, is that they are not trying to destroy an opponent. They are instead trying to find a way to disarm the situation and create a level playing field. Scenario 1, the work front. A coworker turned project manager picked his friend over me for a project lead even though I was more qualified. He gave her access to documents and resources about the project that I didn't have access to. Keep in mind, I don't want to leave this job as I see potential, but I cannot continue to function under these circumstances. Scenario 2, the home front. Someone who I used to live with tried to kick me out of their house during an argument, even though we both shared expenses, and they knew I had nowhere to go. That was their leverage. She did pay more than me of the expenses because I only had a part-time job at the time. Under normal circumstances, I would detach. But in this case, I love this person and want to make it work. Scenario 3, the goal front. Years ago, I took an extended absence from playing hockey, and when I came back to play again, one of my teammates commented rudely that I was playing lower than my usual standard, and he apparently thought that he was entitled to bully me about it. He told me that I needed to come to the rink, change into my hockey gear, be quiet during the game, and then change back into my street clothes and leave quietly. I do feel in my heart that this is a lesson that life is presenting me with, and thus am making every effort to level the playing field. After all, I deal with enough strife in my professional world and don't feel like it makes sense to put up with this nonsense in a volunteer organization.
In response to those three examples, I have some insight in terms of my own opinion, my own feelings about those things. I'm sure many of us have experienced something, if not exactly the same, something similar. The example that I want to talk about first, well, let's start with the home example, that home example. Now, many times, people are inclined to quantify contribution at a household. They're inclined to say, oh, hey, I do more around here than you do, or I pay more than you do, and that kind of thing, if there's a point of contention. In reality, even though one person may actually do more of the cleaning or do more of the cooking, one of the people might make more money, the reality of the situation is that in a balanced, harmonious relationship, that we have some kind of notion of an equal partnership. Therefore, for someone to go ahead and feel like they can kick the other person out of the house, to feel like they have that leverage, just because they do more, supposedly, or they pay more, I think that's extremely inappropriate. Now, again, we want to do some fact-finding or some information gathering. You know, what was the background of the argument? Why the arguments occur? Maybe people sometimes say things they don't mean in a certain situation, but then something slips out and people hurt each other, and things kind of seem to come off the rails. So in this specific situation, I think it sounds like the person who kicked the other person out is probably kind of grasping at straws, as the phrase goes, trying to find anything to one-up the person they were in an argument with. Again, I need more context, but that's what it sounds like to me. What are your thoughts about that example, Eric?
Well, I guess you have to kind of hone in on, is this their default response anytime there's conflict? Like, do they always threaten to kick this person out whenever there is points of contention? Or is this a one-off kind of thing? I think that plays a big role in determining if this is an issue that needs to be dealt with or if it's just a one-off.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. There's always, in general, the one-off thing I agree with. And here's the thing is that we run into complicated situations. For example, like, let's say one of the people, so there's a couple living together. Let's say, just for the sake of the example, we have a boyfriend and we have a girlfriend. Now, the girlfriend happens to have a kid, and the boyfriend whom she lives with is engaging in illicit behaviors. Now, if he was not engaging in those illicit behaviors and the situation, I guess you could say, called for it, then you would say something along the lines of, okay, this is not fair. Again, we're equal partners, back to what I said earlier. But in this situation, we look at this and we wonder if this is again, we need more context to determine if this qualifies for the playground rules phenomenon or the effect. Because what if the lady in this situation is trying to protect her son or daughter from the illicit behaviors of the boyfriend? What if he's, drunk? What if he's high on drugs? What if he's being abusive? So at which point do we say it's a power play on her part? And at which point do we draw the line and say, you know what, she needs to do what's in the best interest of, her child, to protect that child?
Well, I think in that example, I think it's more about a defense mechanism than a tool. And so defense mechanisms are understandable. A parent's obviously going to be concerned about their child and the child's safety.
Right.
But more in the context of something more trivial, like spouse X maybe devotes too much time, according to their partner, to playing recreational sports, or to maybe being in a band, or something of that nature. And to where every time this person tries to gravitate towards their passion, the other person is going to, as a tool, going to kind of wave the flag over their head of, if you keep doing this, I'm going to kick you out. So I think that's what we're talking about more so than what would be, I guess, most understandable, that if anybody is threatening the livelihood of someone's child, obviously they're going to want you to be gone.
Absolutely. That's a good clarification. So there you have it. There's the one-off for the exception where you say, okay, obviously a parent is going to want to go in and protect their kids. But if this is a regular situation of just an argument between two people, where objectively speaking, you could say that both people have some fault, and no one is putting the other person or themselves in any immediate danger, then to kick somebody out of the house is essentially a power play. No matter how much money they're contributing, how much money they're making, or what they do around the house, right?
Yeah, it could be construed as a power play, and I think that's what we're trying to address. How do you subvert that situation without ending the relationship, which in this case this person doesn't want to because they have feelings. And that's where it becomes tricky, because you can become passionate about your position, and then you can say things you don't mean and escalate this to a scenario in which, once again, they'd be justified in wanting you to leave.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the standard responses, because for me, this specific episode is about communication. We spoke about coping in the last episode, and this episode is about, so maybe coping is like internal, communication, or the last episode spoke about internal sort of mechanisms, coping skills, which I guess the internal version of that would be called processing. It's a term often used in the field of psychology. And then something that we do externally would be more along the lines of communication. So me coping internally is processing what happened, what just occurred, and what conclusions did I draw from it. And then communicating is more along the lines of I'm making my feelings or my opinions about a certain matter heard. It's not something I'm just doing within myself. So the reason why that distinction is important is because we are trying to go ahead and hone in on what can we do or specifically say to balance the scales in situations where we are in an unfair advantage. In this case, I really believe the go-to would be, again, just my opinion, any two people who are living together who have an argument, and like I said, one-offs or extreme occurrences where people are in danger, notwithstanding, just a regular, let's say, argument, if it could be classified as such, between two people who are living together, there should never, ever be one person saying, get out of my house, because it's not just my house or your house, it's our house, and nobody should ever have the leverage in that situation to kick the other person out.
So you in the psychological field, how would you suggest that this person that feels they're being victimized by these kind of scenarios, how would you say that they make the sales pitch of this is our house, not just your house, not just my house?
Very good point. I think that a lot of how we communicate is the how, in and of itself. So if we're to go ahead and say in a calm but firm manner, something like, listen, I know you're upset and we're in an argument, and I take my responsibility. I take responsibility for my part of it. However, I have a right to be here just as much as you do. I have a right to be here just as much as you do is acknowledging that the other person that we're in an argument with shares this space, has a right to share that space, again, as much as we ourselves do, and it stands firm that, hey, I'm upset like you are. I acknowledge that we're in a difficult place here. Yet at the same time, nobody should have an advantage in this situation over someone else, or try to create an advantage on some kind of false pretense. What do you think? Is that a fair assessment of the situation?
Sounds very fair. And if you could put on your playground expert hat, how about throwing a curveball in the mix and proposing that maybe if they're unable to detach from their feelings of ownership because it's their house, what kind of solution would it bring if both people decided to buy a house together? Would that alleviate the problem, or do you think it would make it worse?
You know, it could. It could, contextually, or depending on what happens. For example, let's say one of the partners goes ahead. Let's say two of the people move in together, or both people, I should say, move in together, and then one person is still paying more than the other person. That person can still say, "Hey, well, this is my house." It's like, well, wait a minute, it's not your house. Number one, it's a rental. If we are in fact renting something, if it's an apartment or something like that. So again, we're back to that, and again, however much we're contributing is not as important in the situation. So I think that in general, I think that would be a good thing, though. Again, exceptions notwithstanding, because I think that when people are upset, and this is something that's been covered in many works of literature, what do? They go ahead, they grasp, they look for ways to go ahead and level themselves up, make themselves feel strong over another person. it's unfortunate, but it's kind of natural. When people get into an argument, they'll sometimes go ahead and try to quote unquote one up each other. So what ends up happening is that they're looking for ways to gain that leverage in the arguments. Maybe they don't feel that this is their house more than it is somebody else's house in their regular everyday life, but in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the argument, it's like, get out of here, because I'm the one who pays the bills here, not you, kind of thing. Just seems like a quick go-to kind of cheap shot that somebody can take at someone else. So I think that in general that would that could and would help to level the playing field. But again, I'm sure there are situations where people move in together and it's no more one person's home than it's the other person's home, and then somebody will still tell them to leave.
So in your mind, at some point we have to wonder if it's no other option but to detach. So if this person chooses to let go of what they're grasping at what point do you think it'd be sane to decide to maybe cut the ties?
That's a great question, and the thing is that it's up to everyone's threshold. I think that relationships, and this goes deeper into something else here, but if I may, I'll expand on that for a moment. I think that relationships are often defined by in addition to love and the other things that we talk about, like commitment and trust, is like, what's our threshold? I think that people will kind of naturally, in some ways, either implicitly or explicitly, kind of push each other's buttons a little bit. And the question becomes, how much can a person take from someone else? So let's say, for example, that two people kind of irritate each other a little bit sometimes, but they love each other. They still end up getting married. Like, yeah, you know what? Someone may say, "Oh, he irritates me. He's the best guy for me, or she's the best lady for me, or whatever." Then they've determined at that point that person doesn't cross a certain threshold or a certain line where we could say, "Hey, we can't deal with this person anymore." However, if that abusive behavior, or the way that person makes us upset begins to overshadow our love for that person, or the joy that we feel with that person, that joy that we feel in life, then yes, as difficult as it is, it's time to let go. And I think many people out there can speak to this. I've had to let go of some people who were very, very dear to me in my life. It was very, very difficult for me. But at the same time, when I got over those people on several occasions, my life got better. I felt better. I looked better. I became stronger, and it's necessary. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's an important tangent. How much are we willing to go ahead and cope with one person and their, whatever kind of negative feelings they may bring us, or what kind of negative feelings we may experience with them, and then does that overshadow our love for them or our happiness with them? And those kinds of things. Then we also have to look at, and this is a different level of grain, if I can refer to it as such. In that specific moment, is that person really trying to go ahead, in context of the playground, use their leverage over somebody else? Are they doing that regularly, or is this kind of like what you had said, just a one-off where I was upset in the moment, I said something that I didn't mean to say? I'm sorry, this is your house, just as much as it is mine. If there's a pattern, I think we could start chalking this up to a playground effect. As a one-off, I think people can say just about anything if they're upset enough in the heat of the moment.
So to summarize this first scenario, what are some takeaways for the listener as far as what you would suggest that they do? What cues can they go off of or feed off of to know, hey, this is a one-off, they may change? Or what are some signs that you can maybe point to that, this person's probably not going to change, they may not be ready for a relationship or not ready for that relationship? What advice would you have for our listeners?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question, and you always ask good ones. I think that it goes back to what I said about patterns. If you have one instance, that may be just a one-off, but if you have multiple instances, then what you have is starting to become a pattern. A repeat offender. And if somebody is a repeat offender, there's a good chance. Again, it's not for sure, but that type of behavior will continue in the future unless that person experiences an incredible change of some kind, or a major revelation, some kind of breakthrough. Again, and this is not to sound cynical, but the argument is out there that they'll say, one side of it would be to say, and I don't feel this way 100%, but when people say, oh yeah, well there that person goes again, the leopard always shows his spots, as the saying goes. At the same time, though, I think it's important to give people a chance to learn and to change, and for the better, and at least to tweak in some areas. But if you see an ongoing pattern of abusive behavior where people are making power plays, again, that is absolutely positively a red flag as to the playground rules phenomenon.
And what responsibility, in your mind, does the victim or perceived victim in this scenario have? People are always quick to put the blame on, I guess, the quote-unquote offender. But a lot of times, the other person is engaged in activity that kind of motivates that action.
Yes.
In what way can the victim in this scenario accept extreme ownership of what's going on and say, hey, maybe there's something I'm doing that is leading this person to act how they're acting? And again, not that it's their fault, but a lot of times A plus B equals C.
I come from the school that believes it takes, along the lines of what you're saying, it takes two to tango. I don't believe that when there's a dispute that anyone can say there's absolutely 100% one person at fault. I don't believe in that, actually. I believe, well, let's say, for example, somebody's and maybe again as a one-off, somebody comes home from work, they had a bad day and they're frustrated, they're irritable, and nobody else really did anything wrong per se, or trying to be understood, and they say, back off, leave me alone, they kind of snap to them. It's like, come back later, I'm sorry, I was just in a bad mood, I didn't mean to snap at you. So maybe in that situation, but I think that in almost every case, you're going to have, it takes two to tango. And if we're escalating to the point that people are telling each other to get out of the house and that kind of thing, there's definitely some inappropriate behaviors that took place. Yes, we're quick to blame the offender, but the person who that was told to, who was told to get out, there's, in many cases, again, not all, I don't like to speak in absolutes, as you know, not all cases, but in many cases, probably in most cases, I would say, there's something that the person did who was told to leave, where they weren't just 100% the victim, they contributed to the argument, to the dispute somehow as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned work, and in an earlier episode we talked about how sometimes people make the mistake of trying to find the respect in the home front, let's say, that they're not getting at the work front, and how that's a big mistake. Scenario 2 was the work front. Can you go over your thoughts on that scenario?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, again, we look for patterns. So this experience that I'm talking about, this actually happened to a friend of mine, and that was the case. So the person, who, just to refresh on that, so the person who was the coworker became the manager, and then made a friend of theirs a project manager for a specific, very important project instead of my friend. So, and my friend was definitely more qualified. I mean, that person that was made the project manager had almost no qualifications, no background in that whatsoever. Now, in order to go ahead and to get that person up to speed, his friend I'm talking about, that manager's friend who became the project manager, he gave her access to as much training, as much resources, as much documentation as possible. And he deprived my friend of the opportunity to look at that documentation, technical documentation, to have access to those resources. So in that situation, my friend felt like, oh, well, this is not fair, and this kind of thing. You're giving her a leg up on me, but she felt like, oh, what's the point? If I go ahead and say something to him, he doesn't respect me anyway. To that coworker who became manager, or go ahead and go to HR, right? So human resources, and it's really difficult to prove anything there. I mean, my friend wasn't being harassed or anything like that. So I think that at that point, I think it's important for that person, my friend in this case, to ask, not just go ahead and just throw in the towel or give up on the situation, to go ahead and ask for those same resources. Now, she may or may not get those resources, may not get be given access to those, which is partially out of her control. But if she takes a nice firm stance that says, I would like to go ahead, I would like to be able to inform myself on this project as well. I would like to have access to these same resources. Now at that point it might feel like, oh, hey, too late because that person has already been the project manager. But here's the thing. Life works sometimes in mysterious ways. My friend actually had the opportunity to go ahead and step into that role, because within about a year after the original person who was being favored was given that role, that person left the company to pursue another opportunity. So with my friend, had she asked for access to the documentation, to the resources, again, they could have said no, but she would have been more up to speed and more ready to step in to replace the employee who had left. So again, the opportunity opened up for her. Maybe she wasn't quite ready. So what we have to do, in my opinion, is sometimes, even if, it's kind of like they say, sometimes a door is shut in one place and a window is opened in another. I think it's important to remember that sometimes the things that we want to happen don't happen in the time frame that we want to, or the terms that we want them to happen, but the opportunities will present themselves. And I have dozens of examples like that, even in my own life. And in this case, I think that eventually my friend, got the opportunity that she wanted. It just, again, didn't happen in the time frame and the context that she wanted it.
And it may be speculation, but what do you think led your friend to not quitting that company? Did she see promise, or was she counting on a paycheck, or what made her decide that she needed to stay there?
Well, yeah, I mean, she'd essentially been victimized by the playground, and she felt that way, and I think that her staying there was just a matter of familiarity and comfort. I think that she felt already discouraged. Her self-esteem was probably already getting lower. Like she was saying, "Oh, well, I could go ahead and I could switch companies. What's the points?" Then I started off at the bottom of the chain at the new company as well, and I have to prove myself. And then we're faced with people who already know each other. Potential of cliques. I think that sometimes people stay in a mediocre situation or a bad situation because they believe that the next situation could be worse. And unfortunately, in the case of the right, the other situations can be worse. But again, no risk, no reward. So I think that at this point she probably just felt discouraged enough that she decided to stay there just because she didn't feel confident enough about doing anything else, or confident enough in how things were going to go, from the standpoint of a new company.
And to look into the common denominator aspect, do you know much about her home life? Like, was she not acknowledged for her accomplishments at home, or?
I know a little bit from that standpoint. I know that in her case, I think that her parents were very loving to her in some ways, but other ways that other times they were very inclined to go ahead and to criticize her and to blame her for things. So I think that she felt like slightly defensive about that. And yeah, it's possible that could tie into her home life somehow, but I think that maybe that feeling of being criticized or being blamed, maybe that she carried that the feelings associated with that into the workplace and already had made a predetermination about how her own destiny was going to go to some degree, perhaps.
So I guess while what was happening to her at work was not ideal, maybe she was viewed work as a safe haven from the home life that maybe she wasn't too happy with.
That is possible. I hadn't looked at it from that angle. If I had to venture to guess, knowing her, I would say that she was probably less happy with the work environment than with the home environment. In other words, she was happier at home, even if it wasn't great all the time, because at home at least she got some degree of love and nourishment, whereas work was pretty much just like other than getting a paycheck, was just constantly a disappointment.
But I guess you just pointed out, I guess only one of those scenarios was paying the bills, whatever bills she had to pay.
That's true. That is true. And that's what ends up happening. I think that a lot of people feel that way. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think that, a lot of people feel that way. Like, hey, they get into a work situation. Yeah, it stinks over here, but what's the point? I go over somewhere else, it's going to feel even worse, because the constant things that we've experienced in life, and this is the cumulative effect of the playgrounds. This is why this is so important. I can't stress this enough. If we're bullied enough in school, or the teacher favors someone else, if we're treated poorly at home, chastised, criticized, blamed, and then after that, again, we're looked over for promotions at work and that kind of thing. Number one, there's no way out of it. That's the number one problem. But number two is that it's very sad. But I think at some point, people start believing that good things. They stop believing that good things can happen to them. They feel like, oh, there's a black cloud over my head. Nothing good is ever going to happen, or someone has cursed me. Something like that. And it's very unfortunate that people should ever feel that way. And this is, again, in my opinion, a very, very direct consequence of people facing the playground in every aspect of their lives.
So to sum this scenario up, if there's anything else you want to add, what advice can we have for people that are probably in the same situation? Is it worth sticking around, hoping that they may have similar luck to your friends, and eventually the vacancy they're hoping for opens up for them? Or at what point do you decide to see the writing on the wall and hang the cleats up?
Yeah, see, it's important, and there's absolutely no right or wrong answer there. But I believe that from a morale standpoint, what works better for me, for example, because I've spoken on the show before, in terms of being bullied or being overlooked by teams, even though I was qualified or overlooked on the job. The thing is that you have to I really believe that you have to find the gumption and also be firm in your stance. Kind of like, you don't need to necessarily fight back or be combative, but I think it's important to stand your ground. But I think that if you go ahead and if you stand your ground in enough situations, then I think that eventually people start picking up on that. It's strength and confidence. Maybe there's a confidant that we can speak to, a family member or a friend or somebody, a spouse, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, whomever. If we go ahead and keep it bottled up inside of ourselves, then we're likely to just feel worse or to plateau or to implode. I think it's important that we communicate things when they are not going well for us. Now, that doesn't mean we want to go ahead and at every family gathering we want to talk about every single problem, like, oh, hey, had a terrible week last week and everything went wrong and, dog ate my homework, all that kind of thing. Like, you don't want to be that person where, people get into family gatherings and they want to hear nothing but problems. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand who in your own network of people is somebody who you can speak to, somebody who won't judge, someone who will listen carefully and objectively, who will let you vent. And at work, go ahead and express, hey, listen, don't have to say anything bad about anybody. This is what I need to be successful, and this is what I'm asking for. For example, me, I just started a new job recently, and I went ahead and within the training format, I said, hey, this is what I need. I feel like I need to be successful from a training standpoint. Now, they haven't necessarily come around and offered me everything that I've asked for, but at the same time, they acknowledged it, and we have a time frame for me getting those things. And this week has been a heck of a lot more productive for me than the previous weeks have been, because I finally have a realization of what's going on in the internal workings of this company and the technicalities and that kind of thing. So I think it's important to be firm in our stance, assertive in our stance, but also calm and diplomatic. The underlying message of every aspect that we are in life should be, whether it's at home, at work, pursuing a goal, volunteer organization, I have a right to be here just as much as you do. And that is, people hear that enough times, and people stand their ground enough times, and eventually, the hope and often the outcome is that people begin to respect us more. We're able to bridge the gap on some of these injustices.
Absolutely. So going into goals, where do you think it's more important or worth a person's while to endure whatever pain or strife they're going through? Do you think that it's worth hanging out in a home situation that's not working? Obviously, when they're kids, there's certain things you have to do, but mine is kids. Is it worse with the health to hang out in a home scenario that's not working, or in a job scenario that's not working?
I believe that our home is our kingdom. And I mean, when I say kingdom, it's not for just a king, it's a shared kingdom. And I believe that, the spouses should feel like it's their kingdom. And the children should feel like it's their kingdom. Now, kingdom is not a matter of, saying who's in charge. It means it's kind of like it's a sanctuary. We have our own space, hopefully. We have our own, whatever it is. We have our own games. We have our own electronic devices. We have our own books. Or we share them with the people that we love. I think that when you have stress inside the home, in a negative situation in the home, I believe that supersedes all negative situations just about anywhere else. Now, again, there are exceptions. I think it's better to be bickering with siblings at home than it is to being beaten up by a bully, walking home from school every day. But at the same time, I think that with all other things being equal, I think that home needs to be the sanctuary, and that stress in the home supersedes stress everywhere else. And I think that's why a lot of times people avoid the home, because things aren't going well, and they gravitate towards working too much, becoming workaholics, or they join volunteer organizations or special interest group and do those things almost religiously because they feel like they have nothing to come back to at home, nothing that makes them happy. That's how I feel about it. What are your thoughts?
So in that situation, the person that places that much emphasis on their goals and extracurricular activity, could it be that maybe their happiness is kind of going to be an issue because they're maybe putting too much pressure on that goal in the setting to provide for them what they're not getting at home or at work?
Yes, and this is something that we touched on in another, I think on our previous podcast. This is like, things are horrible at work, so, we it's natural to look at the home or hobby groups to go ahead and fill the voids, or things are terrible at home, so we go ahead and we create maybe sometimes even unrealistic expectations for what's going on at work and what's going on in our special interest group. I think that human beings are looking for a level of gratification no matter where they go. And that level of gratification does not diminish just because, or that need for gratification doesn't diminish just because something isn't working out somewhere. That means they end up placing more emphasis elsewhere because there's a certain fulfillment. Now, I can go ahead and get really lofty with some of these understandings, like talking about people in their pursuit of, fiscal wealth and happiness and that kind of thing, and say that people in their nature are kind of insatiable creatures. But at the same time, I do want to say that within the realm of, a healthy amount of gratification seeking or seeking sanctuary and that type of thing, absolutely, if things are terrible at home, we're going to want to go ahead and make things look awesome at work or in our special interest group, because we don't have a sanctuary to go back to. We don't have a safe place. We don't have a haven, and those places outside of the home, we look forward to getting out of the house. That's how I feel about it.